Hi, I'm Keval Shah. I am a pianist from London and I'm now based in Helsinki where I am lecturer of lead at the Sibelius Academy. And I am really interested in the global reality of classical music and classical music culture today, and also in the creative possibilities that arise from daring to work between musical worlds and across perceived boundaries of genre, language, and culture. Yeah, I am a classically trained pianist, and my particular focus for the last decade or so has been in the world of song or lead, and that, at least in recent decades, has had quite a fixed performance practice. And the impulse for me pushing against boundaries has come from recognizing in other musicians and in other disciplines just how borderless music can be. And then, really excitingly, with the help of my great colleague Natasha Logus, who is professor in Freiburg and who has been a regular visitor here in Sibelius Academy, she has introduced me to actually the very borderless global nature of the lead, the song repertoire itself, this music for voice and piano. Even if we stick within this kind of classical genre, the musical style, the international nature of the repertoire, that it exists in parts of the world which I previously did not know it existed, that's made me really excited and interested in what a musical practice can look like and sound like if it dares to step beyond preconceived notions of like a genre or style boundary. I guess it's also fair to say that in the last few years I've also been grappling with my own identity in a way, and the relationship between my cultural roots as an Indian person and how that informs or doesn't inform my artistic practice. I think for many years I had been making a conscious separation, or unconsciously making a clear separation between who I am at home and who I need to be in order to be on stage and playing Schubert songs or Brahms songs or whatever. Reconciling my identity has allowed me to play that repertoire with much more confidence, but it's also opened my imagination to how I might bring elements of that culture into my musical practice. And then coming across composers who work across musical languages, particularly my friend and collaborator Rina Esmail, who trained at the Juilliard School in Western classical composition and then also trained in India in Hindustani classical music, and now writes in a sort of bilingual way, discovering her music and her way of working across cultures and across musical languages and styles has really kind of opened a new door for me into how I might work. Yeah, I think we have to be very careful when we define tradition and when we analyze how old a tradition actually is, because very often the things that we consider to be traditional and on which we put a lot of value actually turn out to be things that are not so old at all. I think, for example, I've become very interested in the lead recital as a performance practice, for example, and the ways in which that performance practice has actually evolved a lot since the middle of the 19th century, when lead was first performed in public concert life as opposed to in salons and in private domestic spheres. I was educated in an environment which implicitly told me that the lead recital has always been this one thing, and that we program the repertoire in this one format and we perform it in this one way, and we think of that as a strong established tradition. And then I realized that, oh my goodness, actually this tradition only really emerged in the 1950s. This is a relatively new phenomenon, and the actual truth, the more complete story, is that this performance practice has actually been constantly evolving, which means that I, as an artist in 2025, should feel a certain degree of autonomy and responsibility, in fact, to evolve the performance practice again and to be alert to what factors inform these changing practices. I think we don't need to be scared of changing things. I wonder if in our climate of funding scarcity and worries about the status of this music in relation to wider culture, I wonder if our fears and our worries make us prone to insularity and a kind of self-preservation mode. But I think that the idea of preservation is what makes something fossilize. And I'm more interested in this music as a living, breathing, expressive performance mode than as a tradition or object that needs to be preserved. I think it is possible to do both. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with being fascinated by historic objects. I mean, for goodness sake, we love museums. Museums are full of historic objects. We can be very proud of institutions like museums and what they allow us to engage with as visitors, and what kinds of stories we can learn from the past and apply to ourselves. But perhaps as performing artists, we should be at least conscious of our relationship to the musical material, and whether we are treating the musical material as a historic object, which we are wanting to preserve in a certain form, or if we are interested in using the musical material in order to construct a sonic experience which is new for the time in which we are living. And I think it's possible as an artist to move between those worlds, but simply being conscious and aware of the choices we're making and the implications of those choices, I think, is valuable. It just seems strange to me that we would attempt to recreate the static nature of museum objects in the context of live performance, because I think the very presence of breathing bodies, like the very physicality of music making, suggests to me that there's the possibility of something in the moment and alive to this moment in time.
Yes.
That doesn't mean discarding the musical material.
Yes.
It's about how you use the musical material in order to create something which resonates. It's not about relevancy so much as about resonance, I think. Well, I think we're really lucky at the Sibelius Academy that we have quite many really inspiring teachers who are already thinking about the ways in which musical practices should be shared with our students in a way that allows them to become as well-skilled and versatile as possible. So, for example, many of our students are already taking part in improvisation classes. We already organise courses on free improvisation and sort of getting classical music students particularly to step out of the comfort zone of responding to notation and actually generating musical material from their own bodies and spirits. And I think the more of that we do, the more empowered I hope our students feel to realise that they have creative autonomy. And I really feel this bit very strongly, that having that sense of musical freedom and discovering creative freedom through skills like improvisation and composition allows performers who then work with notated material to find greater freedom through the notation. Because otherwise the notation of other composers' material can become a bit of a prison. I think a lot of students, and I've seen it in myself as well, of course, that quite often the notation can become a barrier to actual music making. Someone like Tuija Hakkila, my colleague in the piano department, the professor of piano, who is so experienced and so knowledgeable about keyboard music across the historical span. She plays and teaches with such creative freedom because she isn't bound by the score. She understands what the notated material offers us as performers, and she also understands the limitations of the notation. And I feel that when I hear her play, even when she's playing music which is fully notated, like this amazing album of Haydn sonatas that she's recorded, I can hear in her approach to that playing that there is this knowledge and understanding of the absolute importance of imagination, an imagination that comes not from the notated score, but from your own musical world, I guess. A musicality that you discover primarily through improvisation and through really absorbing a musical language. I talk a lot now about musical languages because I'm very aware of my own limitations as a musician at the moment, that when I speak, I don't have to be given a script to then speak. I have a feeling or an idea, and I'm so at home in the verbal language that my ideas can just fall out, and they are totally connected to what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. I have this idea in my head, I breathe, and then I speak. And as a musician, I would love to find that same sense of fluidity, that there is an expressive idea and that it manifests itself in sound. And in order for that to happen, I need the same amount of fluency in my musical language as I need in my verbal language. So it's not enough to understand a composer's language theoretically. I think I also need to have tactile experience of working with that musical language so that I can improvise what I say at the piano. Just like I've constantly improvised what I say in words. I just have an idea and then you speak. And then I come to the piano and I think, oh my gosh, but improvisation, I'm terrified of this. What do I do? And you think, actually, just get to know the language. Understand the harmony, understand the language of that style, understand the language of this style. And with those different languages, you then can create new music. This, anyway, is what I am now trying to do. But for me, I'm at the beginning of this process. I mean, only now am I starting to do that because I'm interested in how it will shape my musical path going forward.
Yeah.
But I want to know that even in my practice as a classical musician, I have this ability to freely create, because that also connects me again to my own tradition.
Yeah.
Because I now know that in the 19th century, it was very common practice in concert programs that a pianist would improvise in between pieces. And that's a practice that we have lost. I try really hard in my concert programming when I'm doing a song recital. I think so hard about the connection between songs because I want to make a certain kind of musical architecture. For me, it's not about presenting a bunch of pieces as objects. I want to use the music to create a certain kind of sonic effect, to create a certain kind of sonic architecture through which everyone moves. But at the moment, I'm reliant on the musical building blocks given to me by the pieces themselves. Now, what could happen if I'm not limited by that, but actually I could improvise and create walkways and bridges and staircases in my concert, like musical staircases that connect this to this, because I have the free form ability to shift between these things. I think that would open up so many interesting ways of combining musical worlds, because one of the things I'm most interested in right now is, as I said earlier, is the global nature of song repertoire. Even if I stick within my world as a song pianist, as a pianist of lead, the repertoire is not just European. There is song repertoire for voice and piano I've recently come across in Syria and in Korea and in India and in Indonesia. And I'm fascinated by all of these different sound worlds and by these different poetic styles, by these different languages, both musical and verbal. And I'm looking for ways of integrating these different repertoires into one space. But when the sonic qualities are quite different, it's important to find a way of unifying in some way these different strands so that you don't feel that you've come to a concert and you're having a buffet of totally unrelated things. Of course, we can do that, but I think it's quite demanding on the palate to be asked to taste so many different things one after the other. Whereas if I can find a kind of red line, something that makes it easier to listen to these things, to taste these languages one after the other, I think the experience will be richer. And I'm convinced that one of the ways I can do that is through improvisation. So yes, there are many other sonic ways in which I can control musical architecture. Things like thinking about key relationships between different songs, thinking about motivic links, thinking about tempo, thinking about meter, thinking about harmony. Like, this song ends on an E7 chord. that's such an open invitation to start the next song in A major or something like this. These are sonic things that affect how we listen in time, but I could also improvise. And that would not only be a way of enriching my contemporary musical practice, in other words, a way of enriching the way in which I bring these different cultures into the same space, but it would also at the same time connect me completely to the tradition from which I come. So for me, this way of working is not about making a choice between tradition and, let's call it, innovation in some very loose sense of that word. It's actually a way of saying that I can do both at the same time. That true respect and knowledge of the tradition is a gateway to the future of the genre. I hope that for students seeing a bigger picture of the repertoire, seeing that the repertoire is a broader thing than they thought it was. I hope that's exciting for them. I hope it makes them realise that there are far fewer restrictions and barriers to interpretation and to them finding their way, as it were, than they may have felt. Because I think it is possible to feel a bit hampered and sort of blocked in if your vision of your musical universe is defined by quite a limited range of musical languages, composers, geographical centres. Of course, you can also find your home in that, but I think it's quite freeing to realise just how far Western classical music has travelled globally and how rich the musical results of that travelling are already. Of course, it's also quite overwhelming to realise that, whoa, there's this much stuff. And if I think about my singing students, for example, who are quite familiar with having to study French diction and German diction and English diction and Italian diction, I'm now saying to them, yeah, but there's also repertoire in Arabic, and there's repertoire in Hindi, and there's repertoire in Korean, and okay, actually, what an amazing invitation to say to them, hey, listen, get yourself skilled in these things too, if they're interesting to you. If they're not, that's fine, whatever. But at least know that it's out there. I'm loving this because it's really satisfying my curiosity for cross-cultural musical languages, because a lot of this repertoire that we're finding in non-European countries has been informed by Western classical idiom. So, for example, like a lot of the kind of 20th century Korean art song that I know, and I'm by no means an expert in that repertoire, but from the stuff I've listened to, it is deeply informed by Western classical harmonic language, Western classical form. But it also has sonic elements which are unique to that region, which are drawn from either traditional Korean music, folk music. The same can be said for sure about the Arabic song I've come across. This amazing composer Haswan Sarikli, he's a Syrian composer who trained in Damascus, I think, and his songs are, again, for voice and piano, and in that sense already they are Western in their idiom, but the vocal style is so informed by traditional Arabic singing in its melismatic quality, in its vocal ornamentation, and even in its harmonic mode. It's not all purely tonal music, it's modal, and all the songs that I'm currently working on with Rina Esmail, who uses Hindustani rags, creates a sound world which is born of so many influences, not just Indian, not just Western, but there's a multiplicity of ideas that are being drawn on to create a new sound world. And so for me, as like someone who's just quite curious about things, I find it quite fun because there are so many possibilities. On a deeper level, I think I'm also interested in how performance, like, I don't want to say the concert hall because I think it also exists in spaces that aren't concert halls, but how the act of performance, the act of creating a evening of music, how that can be an exercise in multiculturalism. Not because I have political ambitions to demonstrate to people that multiculturalism is a good thing, but simply because I and so many of us are living in increasingly multicultural societies. So I'm curious about what a musical practice sounds like if it draws from the cultures in which it exists, or the cultures which surround it, rather than creating a performance space which feels isolated from the world around it. Of course, we can do that as well, but maybe I'm becoming more drawn to how my musical practice reaches beyond like that frame of just kind of presenting nice music to people. Yes, I want to do that, but I also want to, well, quite frankly, I want to expand what nice music is. It's not just certain things, it's many things. It's just musically interesting. I mean, that's like above all, it's just musically really, really interesting. I just did a program last week in Zurich with my friend Anna El Hashem, who's Russian Lebanese, and we did a program of a lot of 19th century German and French repertoire, which our audience in Zurich definitely knows, Schumann, Bizet, Chausson, but we chose a lot of this 19th century song which has a kind of oriental angle. These composers who were interested in creating a sense of distance or otherness and foreignness by setting poetry which describes kind of oriental themes, and then finding a musical language that deliberately sounds non-Western, but in quite a, let's say, in quite a facile way actually, and not in a way which has any kind of authenticity musically, but which simply sounds other. And we interspersed those songs with songs by Indian composers and some Arabic song and arrangements of Lebanese popular music as a way of opening our audience's imagination and understanding to the possibilities of what those cultures might actually sound like. It's all very well enjoying Schumann or Ravel in their kind of exotic or oriental mode, but let's appreciate that music for what it is. It is beautiful, but it's beautiful fantasy. There's something wrong with that per se. I don't want to I have no need to cancel the repertoire, right? I want to kind of just suggest that if you listen to this and you think this is actually what Arabic culture is like, then you are sorely mistaken. So let's enjoy this Bizet song about a Arabian hostess and her. This is a very problematic Bizet song about an Arabian hostess saying farewell to this beautiful white stranger. She calls him bel blanc étranger, like a beautiful white man. Goodbye, goodbye. But I wish that you would stay so I could be your slave. This is the text. If we actually think this is what cultures outside of our own are like, come on, we're doing ourselves and those people a huge disservice. So yes, love the song, let's play the song, it's great music, whatever. But how can I program that song in a way that, to me, makes sense of it? And my solution, or our solution, was to amplify the voice of some Arabic musicians. So we made some arrangements of Fairouz, some of her like most popular Lebanese songs, just as a way of introducing an element of authentic Middle Eastern voice into this program. Of course, in India, in the Arab world, there are so many musical cultures. There's no way of saying that in one concert program we can represent all of those. And the purpose is not at all to say that any one song represents anything. It's just a song. Even having one song that comes from that musical world is a step in the direction of broadening a horizon, rather than limiting yourself to just the 19th century Western European imagination of non-European cultures. I would say first and foremost, musicians need extraordinary technical and musical skill. That hasn't changed. That can't change, because without a technical foundation, you have no freedom to actually make your ideas reality. You need to have such a thorough grounding in the theoretical, in the technical, physical, and in the musical elements of whatever world you want to work in. Beyond that, though, I think musicians today, possibly more than in the past, need to be able to articulate their ideas. They need to be able to explain the music they make and why they make it, because we are in a we are living in a time where there is so much available to people, and one of the challenges of being a performing artist is, quite frankly, getting recognized, getting your work seen and taken by promoters, concert halls, record labels, etc. There are so many people who are technically very gifted and musically very gifted and who have trained and developed those skills, but we need people with imagination, with curiosity for the possibilities of music making, perhaps with no answers. I mean, I think I have no answers for anything myself. I have no certainties on anything, but having like a curiosity for searching for musical possibilities, for how you might program things in ways which illuminate new angles, which shed new light on a piece of music. That I think can inspire audiences. It can make people listen in a more concentrated way. It's hard to know. I mean, I don't know, at the most basic level, I think I say you need to be good and you need to love what you're doing and then just keep going. And that is probably it. I mean, I think we have to distinguish between a skill set for a particular kind of professional life and a skill set for you as a musician and a human. If you want to work in an orchestra, you're going to need certain kinds of skills, yes. If you're going to work as an opera singer rather than a concert singer, and you want to spend your life just on the stage doing like solo roles, you need certain skills. If you want to just sing in recital, which is a very difficult thing to do in terms of making enough money, but if you wanted to do that, then you need other skills, right? So those things are one thing, but I would say just if you want to be a creative artist, if you want to just be someone that makes sound and explores, then you need to be curious and brave and willing to try things and so hungry for knowledge and skill. There's no substitute for that. You can have all the best ideas in the world, you can have all the networking skills, you can have all the marketing skills, and those things are important in order to get seen and to get visibility and to more easily find a platform for your work. But once you have that platform and you have to go and do the work, if you don't have the technical and the musical depth, you're stuck. In every genre I can think of, the artists who I love the most, they do not move me because of their technical skill, but if I distance myself from my love for their performance and I just analyse why or how their music moves me, I know that a huge amount of the reason why it has that impact on me is because they have such technical prowess. Because with technical prowess comes liberation, comes the ability to express yourself without interruption, without bumps, without block of any kind. There's a kind of musical freedom that emerges from complete technical facility. It's why I don't see myself in opposition to, it's ironic, isn't it, that like so many of the, let's say if we imagine like traditional classical music education and again, we're so lucky to be in an academy like Sibelius Academy where we have such brilliant and forward-thinking pedagogical attitudes. But even if we think about what a traditional classical music education prioritizes and we think about like the intensity of the technical training in the Russian piano school, for example, and the kinds of stories we hear about the ways in which pianists who were trained in that tradition were educated, the sometimes, quite frankly, damaging way in which technical prowess was encouraged by that certain way of teaching. In making a healthier pedagogical culture, I do not want to get rid of the technical prowess. So I don't see myself as being particularly far away in many ways from this kind of tradition. If I look at my own training was, especially when I was a master's student in London, it was so technical. And without that, I wouldn't be able to do any of the things that I'm trying to do now. I'm so grateful for the education I had, even if I can say that, okay, in some ways it felt quite limited or it didn't open my mind to many of the kind of creative ways which I'm now thinking. Equally, if it hadn't given me that technical grounding, I wouldn't even be able to do these kinds of creative things. So no education can be complete, at least not no institutional education. There's simply not enough time. So I'm very much of the opinion that education is a lifelong thing. I'm learning every single day. And then if I put my teacher hat on, I guess all I'm thinking is, well, what are the things that I feel I want to share with my students while they're in the institution? And that's where I would say things like, in addition to the technical rigour and the musical rigour, fostering that curiosity, fostering that bravery to try new things, improvisation, and yeah, giving students a sense of autonomy, I guess. That's something that will come with many more years, and I feel like I'm only just starting to feel a degree of autonomy in my work. Like I don't have any kind of belief that we can create that in 5.5 years, and it's not about that. But I think it is possible to maintain the highest musical and technical standards whilst also encouraging people to work from their own inner conviction and not just be accidental slaves to an accidental tradition. I've always been very aware of my emotional world because my parents were super healthy about this as we were growing up. You know, we had dinner every evening as a family at the table. After my dad would come home from work, my mum would come home from work first and she would then cook after working all day. And then my dad would come home and then we would sit and we would always talk about our feelings every evening.
Wow.
It was never just, how was your day? It was always, how are you feeling about things? And so my parents are just amazing. They did not have that in their own childhood, so I don't know where they found it. I wonder if they were like that with us because they didn't have that with their own families. I mean, they're close to their families, but, parenting in the 1960s was not the same, right? So, especially in East Africa where my parents were born, it was a different kind of culture. And my parents, they wanted to be, and we still are, they wanted to be close to their children. So there was a lot of, I still share everything with my parents, and there's nothing they don't know about my life, truly nothing. That meant that I always felt that my emotions were quite close to the surface. At the same time, I know now, because I look back and I understand it, when I went into music education, when I went into the conservatoire environment and to university to study classical music, I started, without realizing, to completely separate my emotions from my musical work, because I internalized very strongly this feeling that who I was, particularly as an Indian person, was so not what I was supposed to be in order to be a classical musician. That's not because anyone told me that explicitly, although there were a few people that said super racist things. It was more just that I didn't see anybody else that looked like me anywhere. Not in the audience, not on the stage, not in the school with me, nobody. So I guess the only emotions that were close to me as a student were passion for the music and anxiety about becoming the right kind of person. I was working so hard during my study days from a place of fear. I didn't realize that at the time, but I was practicing many hours a day, not purely from joy and love for the music, but out of fear that if I didn't practice that many hours, the process of becoming that particular kind of person would crumble. It was such a fragile process that I felt like I had to constantly be doing it, because if I stopped for a second, the whole thing would be undone. Then I had therapy a few years ago with this amazing therapist in London who works particularly with performing artists. And that's when I started to look back and understand that that's what had been happening all this time. And then I was able to reconcile over the course of that year, like all of my challenges with losing my identity along the way and bringing it back and coming back to the piano with a sense of my original emotion, which was just love for this music. My first contact with classical music was a moment that created such love in my body. I just adored, it was a piece of Mozart that I just adored. I adored it. But then in the process of becoming a musician professionally, I let that love be overwhelmed by other kinds of emotions. And now that I've kind of gone through that and understood it and untangled all that stuff, I feel a lot more that I'm now back to where I started in a way. Like, yes, I now have all the technical and musical skill, I hope. I'm back to my very original relationship with the thing, which was just wow, I love this. And I feel much happier working from a place of love than from a place of fear. For me, it was actually not piano music, it was singing in a choir. And I think that's, for me, that's really significant because it also explains, I think, for me, or reminds me that singing and vocal music has been at the complete center of my world, from the beginning. That it's, in a way, it's no surprise that I fell into lead, because my initial love was not a pianistic one. It was a language one, it was a vocal one. It was Mozart, the Vespers, and it was this Laudate Dominum that was just, it blew me away. It was just magic. it's a kind of light that I can't find anywhere else in my life. Like, there's so much music I love from all over the world and from all different kinds of styles, but that particular experience, like listening to Mozart in particular, it satisfies something in me that nothing else will touch. Doesn't matter what it is, there's just something about that music which I just can't ever get enough of. 100%. My world is like so infinitely richened by having the possibility to live with that music. But I don't feel any need to then make the step to say it's the best thing ever. Nothing is better than this. This is the peak of humanity. You know, this kind of language I don't need to entertain, because it's not necessary for me to qualify my love for this music by making a statement about its superiority. I think that goes back to what we said earlier about the kind of self-preservation, the defensive mode that we can step into when we are feeling threatened, and
Fear.
when we feel like our cultural foundation is being like eroded. If we have that feeling, I don't have that feeling, but if you have that feeling, then you're scared, and from that fear you start to double down on your values. And so rather than just saying that Mozart is light, you say that Mozart is the best light or the only light. It's that which I am now totally pushing away, because I have discovered light in my life from all kinds of music. And I feel so happy that I haven't anymore got to choose. But for a long time I did. For a long time I stopped listening to all the other music that I actually liked. I stopped listening to everything that wasn't classical music because I was invested in this project of becoming a classical musician. And for me that meant only listening to Fischer Dieskau and Barenboim playing Brahms. It's wonderful stuff, but it's not the only stuff. This manifests itself also in the way in which we live, like societally, that when we feel that we have to choose one identity, we end up behaving in a manner which excludes not only other people, but it also excludes parts of ourselves which we might benefit from being in closer contact with. That if I say that, oh, I am Finnish, then I'm saying that you are not, but I'm also saying that, oh, I'm only Finnish, as if there's nothing else to me other than this particular image of what Finnish means. Or of course I can apply the same thing to what's happening in my own country, in the UK. We have a very strong surge in the polls for a right-wing party that has a very specific and narrow definition of what it means to be English or to be British, and it just seems to me so unnecessary to reduce things to any one way of being. Of course, it feels easier. It comes from a place of insecurity or fear or threat, but it does not accurately reflect the complexity and the beauty of the complexity of the world. I guess what I love about the music that I love, if I think about all the music that I really, really love, it's music which always resists falling into any one camp. Like the artist that I'm most inspired by, the music that I love the most, it always seems to sit somewhere between worlds. Like it can't be even Mozart, it can't be pinned down to being one thing. It always seems to have influence from other things as well. Yeah. Well, I don't envy anybody who is in charge of designing higher music education, because I think it is really tricky, but maybe the one thing which I would love to introduce to the middle, to the kind of the heart of this, is cross-departmental collaboration as a routine, regular part of life, so that the students are constantly in touch with other musical practices. And I think that's particularly something which is so special about our academy, because we have not only classical music departments, but we have a huge global music department, we have brilliant jazz department, folk music department, and pop music, and there's an opportunity for all students to exist in the same space and to learn from each other in some way. And so the more we can create platforms and opportunities for students to work across disciplines and benefit from these different ways of working and different ways of being a musician, I think that would really transform how students see themselves and how they take responsibility for their own artistic growth. There are so many artists that I love, and I'm really making an effort now to listen as widely as possible, and to follow. If I listen to one artist and I get sort of taken by their music, to then go and find other things. So, for example, I think I came across Ganavia via Aruj Aftab, and I heard Aruj Aftab play actually in Helsinki at Flow Festival last year, and this was such a revelation for me, this kind of combination of elements of Sufi music and like traditional Arabic music and some elements of classical music, some elements of jazz. It's just such Aruj Aftab's musical world is so rich. And then I came across Ganavia, who is this extraordinary artist, studied jazz and also South Indian devotional music, and has combined these things in the most beautiful way. From all of these people, whoever it is, whether it's Pekka Kuusisto or Nils Fram or any of them, that what I am drawn to primarily is simply the actual musical material. I find the musical material really alluring and really interesting and really appealing. And if I then think why, it's because it's layered. It is beauty born of curiosity. Someone like Pekka Kuusisto, for example, I admire so much and learn so much from because of the way in which he has built his career from, again, this very, very strong foundation, technically and musically, in the classical tradition, and used that as a springboard to then come into contact with clearly all the other things that he finds interesting. And I love his bravery, I love his courage, I love his enthusiasm and his curiosity for making collaborations of different kinds. I recently heard on the radio his concert from the BBC Proms this summer, where he made a collaboration with the Norwegian Chamber Orchestra, I think it was. Collaboration with a Sami singer, and Katarina Barduk or something like this, I think her name is, and Norwegian Chamber Orchestra. It was amazing. And again, it's only possible because of the rigour of his technical and musical skill, and then his ability to absorb new musical information from different genres and styles. Coming into contact with those artists, people like Anushka Shankar as well, who I also saw in Helsinki this summer in Helsinki Festival. Again, somebody who has the most extraordinary technical gifts on the sitar, but also the most open-minded approach to creating layers of musical sound. Being in contact with those people gives me courage to try and do it myself, to take what I've got from my training and take my foundation and make it as solid as possible, and then to go and jump from there and see, okay, what can I do with this foundation? Where can I go? Am I in conversation with these artists? I don't feel like I'm there yet. No, I don't feel like I'm yet pushing the boundary enough to say that I'm really in conversation with them. However, I would say that the composers that I'm now working with, people like Rina Esmail, when I'm playing her music, and in particular music that she's written for me, I feel like that is the site where I'm starting to work in the ways which those other artists inspire me. With Rina Esmail, the project that we did most recently, where I performed her complete solo piano music at Flow Festival, most of that music was written for me and in collaboration with me. It was my ideas and her ideas coming together. These ideas were coming from everywhere, from painting to sculpture to Gujarati folk music to Hindu spiritual music to Hindustani classical music, with some Bollywood influences, French Impressionism. There's all kinds of stuff being thrown on the canvas there, which are all the things that she and I both find interesting and appealing and alluring. And then, you know, in a way, she's then doing the kind of creative work of melding those influences into a sound world, and I'm just playing. But that was a really amazing experience in terms of feeling like I was actually at the creative heart of something. And the more I'm doing of that, the more satisfied I'm feeling. I think I see my path evolving basically in two directions simultaneously. One is that in the field of the Western classical idiom, I see my path moving more in this direction of globalizing the Western classical idiom, which involves me spending more time collecting, gathering, finding this material that exists from all corners of the world where Western classical music education and Western classical idiom travelled, gathering more and more musical material from the composers and the artists who are living in those places and who have written music, which is inspired both by the Western classical tradition and by local musical traditions. And at the same time, I see my path evolving to encompass other kinds of musical material. So working with composers to create new music, which is born not only of my classical influences, but also of the other kinds of musical worlds I find interesting, collaborations with performers and other artists who might not be from classical backgrounds, and developing these improvisational skills and linguistic fluency skills as a musician that would allow me to make my own arrangements of non-classical pieces and bring them into the mix of my programming. So it's a two-way process. On the one hand, it's continuing in the classical path, but being much more honest about what the more complete picture of the classical path is, and being curious about the reality that the classical music idiom exists all over the world, and wanting to make sure that my repertoire reflects the globalism of the repertoire that exists. And at the same time, creating new music and working with different kinds of artists so that I am also stepping out of the Western classical idiom altogether and seeing what happens when I come into contact with artists who work in different worlds. If I can do both of those things, I feel like I'd be very happy.